Kalvin Garrah. Garrah? Whatever. A pretty man, a trans man, but a wrong man. Claims to have advice for trans kids and their parents. I can't wait to hear what advice you have for us here today, Mr. Garrah. So, take it away.
What's up, you guys? Calvin here, and welcome back to my channel, where today, as you can probably notice, I did cut all my hair off. A lot of people were telling me to cut it, a lot of people were telling me not to cut it, so I cut it just because having long hair actually turned out to be very inconvenient. Washing it more frequently, getting knots in it more frequently, I was just kind of over all that, so I cut my hair. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm sorry if you're disappointed that I cut it. But a few weeks ago,
Men with short hair, betas!
so I asked you guys what types of videos you wanted to see on my channel. I said I wanted to interact with you guys more, and I said that I wanted to do a video that you guys requested. So I said the top comment on the post would be the video I made, and the top comment went like this: advice for parents of trans kids, and then a couple questions that I'm going to answer within the video. And I figured this would be a video I really wanted to make, and it would be really helpful to a lot of people, because I know a lot of my audience is trans. There might even be people that watch my videos who are the parents of a trans person, and seeing as I transitioned 5 years ago now, I think I have a pretty good outlook on, how your parents are going to react when you first come out, how different types of parents might react, and, tips on how you can convince.
This should be interesting because given that he is 20 years old, that means he transitioned at 15. Which means that his parents would be very supportive parents of his choices. Now, I don't know much about Kalvin Garrah's history. I don't know if he struggled with dysphoria, went to a therapist, and the therapist discussed it. I haven't looked in that deep into the Kalvin Garrah lore. But if he's going to try to say that his experience is somehow typical of the average young person transition, then yeah, I think he's gonna find himself mistaken there. Yeah, I agree, Missing Cog. Doesn't have kids, but is critiquing parenting advice. I'm not saying you have to, but it seems like shaky ground. There definitely can be some useful information from someone who went through this as a child for parents, but I agree that a child, because I'm sorry, he may be 20 years old, maybe this is just the boomer in me speaking, but he's still a fucking kid. Giving advice to parents is a little shaky. I agree, Missing Cog.
Convince your parents to accept you in a social transition way as well as a medical transition way. I'm going to answer the questions that the top commenter asked within the comment first, and then I'm going to start answering some questions that I got on Instagram, pick the most relevant, best ones. As always, if you have any questions yourself, be sure to ask them in my comments down below. I'll try to answer ones that I think need to be answered that a lot of people.
You know how you can tell he's a real man? He doesn't style his hair or anything. Like, this shit would bother the fuck out of me to have the hair right there in my eye. I mean, I have hair longer than he had before he cut it, but it still bothers me if my hair gets in my eyes or whatever.
People would benefit from. As always, this video is sponsored by me. AdSense kind of sucks, so if you want to support me and my channel, you can go and check out my merch. I'll put some of it on the screen here, but the link is in the description down below as well as the comments. But let's get straight into it. Don't want to dilly-dally, just want to get into the top comment and answer the questions that you guys wanted to know. So the first question was how to approach the question of hormones and at what age is it appropriate to reach out to a doctor about it. So the thing about appropriate age for transitioning is a huge controversial topic. In my honest opinion, I don't think that there should be any age limit on social transition as long as your kid or you are the one that is fueling it. As long as your kid is the one saying, I want to dress like a boy, I want you to call me this male name, I want to dress like a male, or vice versa with trans girls. As long as they're the ones that are pushing for it, that shouldn't be an issue because social transition isn't permanent. I mean, I think it can definitely be a little overbearing to go and ask everyone in your life to start calling you a different name and pronouns, especially if you're not 100% sure. So I would maybe start with a couple family members, maybe close friends, and see how you feel about it before you full-blown come out to every single person. And this is why I advocate for you need dysphoria to be trans, and you should definitely really be sure of yourself before you even fully social transition, because social transition is the thing that can cause turmoil in families just as much as medical transition, It can cause you to resent people in your life that don't want to call you the right name or pronouns. It can cause people in your life to view you differently, and it can be a pain in the ass probably to G-transition even if you've only social transitioned. So you really have to be careful about that type of thing. But I would say that when it comes to social transition, there isn't really an age limit as to when it's appropriate for
I generally agree with what he's saying here. I hope he's going to mention that before starting hormones or any kind of medical transition, you want to talk to a psychologist because, again, one of the leading causes of detransitioning is someone who thinks they're dysphoric because they've watched YouTube videos or read websites, but haven't actually talked to a professional. Now, that's not to say that trans people are crazy or any stupid transphobic shit like that. What I'm saying is that to avoid additional hardship on yourself, talk to a professional to make sure you follow the best advice for you. One thing I notice he seems to be skipping over, and maybe he's about to talk about it, are hormone blockers or puberty blockers. Yeah, I agree, Missing Cog. It's a group effort, absolutely.
For a kid to start experimenting, or a person in general. When it comes to medical transition, that is a little bit different of a story. I would say that really any age person can benefit from seeing a psychologist, and not specifically a gender therapist, but
this is what makes Kalvin Garrah so frustrating, is that on some things he seems very intelligent and informed about, and then he'll see some NB or trans girl who doesn't pass as well as he does for a trans guy and just be a complete total shitheel. So yeah, talk to a professional. If you think you might be dysphoric, talk to a professional. Make sure it's not something else that is more easily rectified than to completely gender transition. Oh yeah, no, he is a total 100% truscum.
I think it's important for parents and even people to know that a lot of the times gender therapists are people that are only going to affirm you 100% 24/7, and they're not going to delve into other things you have going on.
Just after I get done talking about how informed and intelligent you can be, you go right into those turfy talking points. And this is why, ideally, the parents should do some research on the professional they take them to, because this is why reviews can be useful. If someone is just affirming someone without actually listening to them, then that is as bad as someone who is denying someone's validity just out of hand. So, while, yes, affirmation is good, if someone is affirming someone's transition without actually talking to them and getting the full picture in a professional capacity, like anyone who says they're trans, I'm going to affirm because I don't know them or have the capacity to analyze their situation. But if you're going to a professional who is just affirming you, then that is bad too. So, do your research. You may have to talk to 2 or 3 different professionals before you get to. And the reason I'm using professional instead of psychologist or psychiatrist is because there is a significant difference between the two, and I'm not sure which one you should talk to in these situations. Because I don't know anyone personally who's transitioned. I am cisgender, so whoever you need to talk to, talk to them
In your life, and help you manage dysphoria with other things that might be going on. And you don't have to find someone that is against transition. You want to find somebody that is knowledgeable on gender and knows things about trans people, but doesn't just do that, or doesn't just specify in that. For example, my therapist, she mostly works.
Does he have a tattoo on the palm of his hand? Because I've noticed this in other videos. When he holds up his left hand, there seems to be a tattoo or something on the palm of your hand, and that's just... I've never understood people who do that, because it's essentially a temporary tattoo that you go through the pain of a permanent tattoo for.
Works with trans patients right now, but when she began doing therapy and counseling and stuff, she was actually a substance abuse counselor, and she works with a ton of different patients on a ton of different things. So call before you make an appointment with someone and ask around. Ask if people know about gender, if they've worked with trans kids before, if they've worked with trans adults before. But I would highly, highly, highly recommend, before jumping into hormones or even social transition, to talk to a counselor, psychologist, or therapist about how you're feeling, because these are the people that are licensed in this. These are the people who have experience with so many different types of trans people, and they're going to really be able to help you decide when is right for hormones. Also, they'll help you validate your feelings to those in your life who might.
I feel like he's a net negative, Missing Cog, because just because he has good advice, like in this, like part of this video so far. His actions towards other trans people, particularly his reacting to TikToks and things like that, are definitely more damaging than this good advice. Someone can give out good advice like this without being the shitheel he is in other videos.
Not be so sure about it or understand it as well. You know, for me at least, my parents were always pretty accepting, but they were a little bit iffy about medical transition at first. So bringing my parents into my therapy sessions and having my therapist explain that this is very normal and that, you know, she's gone through the criteria of gender dysphoria and she knows that, you know, I would benefit from this, that really helped my parents feel more comfortable in letting me start on hormones. And when approaching the question of hormones, it's kind of hard to do, and it really depends on your parent, but I would definitely come out to them initially as just trans first and bring up the hormones later, because, you know, that can be a lot on someone, especially a parent who just wants the best for you and is worried about you and this is all new to them. But definitely make sure you bring research with you.
He does do cringing at internet trans people who aren't as either far along in transition or as well transitioned as he is. And if I wanted to be a shitty person, I could talk about how feminine his features are, but he's a dude. Like, I'm not gonna be shitty like that. He's a dude.
That's something that I didn't do, and I probably freaked my mom out. But obviously you've watched all the T videos, you've watched all the transition videos, but your parents haven't seen those. So maybe share with them some trans YouTubers who have transitioned well and you think reflect how you feel and talk about things that you're also feeling, and share that with your parents and show them how someone who's similar to you went through HRT and had a very positive outcome.
Nice subtle plug to get people to show your videos to their parents, but I mean, we all gotta hustle.
From it. I'll link my playlist of surgery and hormone videos down below, and I think that can be a great source
Called it.
for parents because I delve into that as a teen. You know, I was 16 when I started on testosterone. But yeah, I would definitely, in most cases, not recommend that a child starts on puberty blockers or hormones until they've had initial signs of puberty. That doesn't mean that.
So you want kids to suffer more because you don't understand puberty blockers. Like, no one is saying put kids on actual hormones until they're older. You know, probably closer to the age you were when you started transitioning. But forcing someone to go through even the start of puberty, from what I've read, can be pretty traumatic on trans kids. So that's why they recommend putting kids on puberty blockers sooner rather than later if they are dysphoric. Because again, puberty blockers are pretty much harmless. They've been in use for decades for things that aren't medical transition.
That someone born male is 6 feet tall and you have to wait until they're 6 feet tall and have a deep voice. But when those signs begin to show, that's when you can really feel the dysphoria manifest. You know, when you're prepubescent, obviously you can feel genital dysphoria, you can feel social dysphoria. But puberty is really, I think, for most trans people, when the dysphoria begins to manifest really hard and you begin to really feel that. So I would definitely wait until you're feeling that dysphoria manifest itself during puberty. But there's always cases of people that start blockers or hormones earlier than that and they never regret it. But I just think it's important to be safe because you never run or regret doing something permanent to your body. The next question is, if you suspect your kid might be trans, do you ask them about it or wait for them to come to you? I would say wait for your kid to come to you. I think that you don't just want to have a gender non-conforming kid and go up to the kid and be like, are you trans? Because sometimes they might just be gay, or maybe they're straight and they just like to dress a certain way. But I would definitely.
There's the conflation of gay and gender non-conforming that a lot of TERFs and truscum like to use. But otherwise, his advice here is sound. Don't assume someone is trans until they say it. And this goes for trans people on social media. Don't assume because someone likes long hair and finger and nail polish that they're an egg. Let them crack it on their own. Otherwise, you're forcing your worldview on them.
Definitely make sure your kid knows that you're open to talking about anything with them. You know, my parents always made sure that they knew that I think my parents always suspected something, but they were always really careful to tell me that they support gay people and they support transgender people. And, you know, my mom's a teacher. She was actually the GSA leader at her high school that she taught at, but they never asked if I was gay. They never asked if I was trans. They always let me come to them and made sure that my home and like my relationship with them was safe to talk about those type of things. What do you wish your parents did differently, and what do you think they did well? There isn't really anything I wish my parents did differently. You know, there's some like personal stuff that I can't really talk about on here. I guess I can maybe talk about some of it, but there are times when, you know, one of my parents would threaten hormones as like a form of punishment, saying I'll take your T away, or early in transition, you know.
Oof, yeah, don't do that. That'd be like taking your kids, you know, other medicine. What? What kind of supportive parents would threaten to take away your kid's transition medication? That'd be like taking, not necessarily as severe, but like taking a diabetic kid's insulin away. Like, they're not taking it because it makes them feel good. Well, they are, but they're taking it so they don't feel horrible and potentially die. Like, well, yeah, don't threaten to take your kids' hormones away. Good advice there.
Someone might have called me my birth name. Like, I think I called one of my parents by their first name and they called me by my birth name. And parents might not realize that that type of thing is really harmful, but, you know, your kid being disrespectful to you is really different than invalidating their whole identity, and those things really hurt at the time, and I forgive those things that happen now. But at the time, you know, I definitely was very, very hurt by it. My parents are very scientifically geared people. My mom's a mathematician, and my dad is a aerospace engineer at NASA, so they're both very medical, scientific people. So when
that does explain a little bit his truscum transmedicalist tendencies. That's how he had to explain it to his parents, so it's a little harder. It doesn't excuse his behavior, but it does explain it a little bit.
I told them trans, they did their research and looked into gender dysphoria and made sure that I went to a psychologist that would look into a lot of my mental issues, and sent me to doctors that had good reputations as not only trans affirmative, but also just good in their general field to discuss things that might be going on otherwise. And I'm very grateful about that. Another thing is, I wanted to start hormones the day that I came out as trans, and I asked my mom every single day since the day that I came out as trans until we made our appointment at the endocrinologist clinic. I asked my mom every single day, I want to go to gender therapy, I want to start T, and I would ask every single day, and my mom didn't budge. She said, no, you need to live your life as a guy, you need to live your life as Kalvin, using he, him pronouns. For, I think I lived as a male socially for a year before I started testosterone. And looking back, that was a really long time to wait, but looking at it now, it's like, that proved to my parents that I wasn't gonna go back on it, and that I really, really wanted this. Because, you know, for a lot of kids, it is a phase, and a lot of kids get tricked by social media into thinking they're trans just because they're uncomfortable in their bodies. And so it's really important to live life as a trans person, live life as male or female and for trans girls, before you decide to just all of a sudden make permanent medical changes to your body. So now I'm gonna...
Hormones are not permanent medical changes. Neither are puberty blockers. So this is, again, why you want to talk to a professional therapist about if you feel dysphoric, or if you just feel like you would be happier transitioning. Because going through puberty for the wrong gender can be quite traumatic for trans kids. That's why puberty blockers are so widely prescribed.
Delve into some questions that people on Instagram asked me. Let me go. I'm not going to be able to answer them all. There were literally thousands of questions, so I'm just going to go through a few of them. One person asked, how do you help parents cope with the grief of losing their child? And my parents, you know, and also when I say parents, I'm not specifically talking about one parent, but one of my parents had a harder time, I think, dealing with losing that daughter than my other parent. And, you know, there were times that one parent would slip up a few times. The thing is, in the beginning, I completely understood that you have to be very patient with your parents, because this is very new for a lot of them. A lot of them don't understand this, and it's really hard on me when I see people that are like mean to pretty accepting parents for slipping up once or twice or every once in a while, because, you know, this this isn't new to you. Trans people do years and months of research, watching T videos, watching E videos, watching surgery videos, but this is all new to your family. Like, you have to be understanding and patient and not just immediately label them transphobic or not accepting just because they slip up or don't understand it 100%. But as for coping with the...
This goes for people in all walks of life. This is a common thing that TERFs and other transphobes will use against the trans ideology or whatever they want to call it. That if you misgender someone, that you're going to get blown up on, and they use the GameStop trans girl clip as an example, where, as I've said before, we don't know what happened prior to that clip starting. It could have been, I've said this before, it could have been a situation where the GameStop employee was like, "Oh yes, sir, I'll be happy to help with it. Actually, it's ma'am. You know, I'm a woman, a trans woman, whatever. Oh, I'm sorry." And then either they slipped up or they just ignored them. Like, I'm not trying to let either person off the hook here for the behavior exhibited in that video. But I'm saying that give people the benefit of the doubt until they demonstrate that they are deliberately being shitty towards you. And that can mean letting transphobes off the hook sometimes. Not that that's a good thing, but it is a good way to make sure that you don't accidentally alienate potential friends or allies. You know, if someone slips up, give them the benefit of the doubt until they slip up enough that it's clearly not a slip up. Why am I watching a planet with a popad? Is this the new Twitch skeptic format? Because I don't feel like getting a webcam or using one, so... What charity? What are you talking about, Morning Bird?
The grief, I think that you just have to remind your parents that they're not losing you. You know, like, you're gonna be depressed and sad and not living your most authentic life if you don't transition most of the time. So you want to remind your parents that this is a way...
Yeah, what are you referring to with why this charity?
For you to live your most authentic life and be the happiest, and any loving, caring parent would do anything they could to make sure that their child is living their most happy, best life possible. So just make sure that your parents know that they're not losing you. They're not going to lose any part of your personality or anything. They're seeing a new part of you that is going to help you live your life so much happier. How relationships work. My parents don't understand it's still a heterosexual relationship. So this is something a lot of people in society don't understand, but attraction, this is how I would explain it at least, attraction isn't just about genitals. If you asked your mom why she was attracted to your dad or her girlfriend or your other mom, I don't know, you know what, I'm being too politically correct. We're gonna go for like heterosexual parents. Let's say you ask your mom, why are you attracted to your dad? She's not gonna say his dick. That's not the first thing your mom is gonna think of. She might say his eyes or his smile or, you know, let's think about another masculine feature, his jawline or his muscles, you know, muscle mass. You know, there are some people out there who are solely attracted to other cis people, would never date a trans person, and that's okay. But there are also people out there who would date trans people. Let's say that you're a straight girl and you would be open to dating a trans guy, but not a girl, not a non-binary person, just cis men and trans men. That doesn't make you any less straight because 99% of the time, trans men have very masculine features, you know, especially those of us who are on T. Your whole entire facial structure can change, your muscle mass can change, your body shape will change to be that of a male. You're looking at...
This is why I honestly think that as Kalvin grows older and gets more real-world experience, I think he will become a decent person, potentially, if he can get the right influences in his life. Because this is, like, there's a lot of good things, good advice he's giving here. But, you know, his other attitudes, and like I said earlier, if the way he was able to convince his parents of his issues is through transmedicalist ways, which is, like, it's only in the last 5 or 10 years or so that there existed enough data to support a non-medicalist view of transition, of transgender people, that, you know, it became acceptable to say, you know, you don't need dysphoria to be a trans, then, you know, I can understand that position. And he does have a financial incentive to retain his ideas. But I hope that he will start interacting with other people who are more on the ContraPoints end of the spectrum than the Blair White end of the spectrum. And maybe he can become a good advocate for trans issues. No, you're good, Morning Bird. You're fine. Why extend so much charity to transphobic behavior? They can always explain themselves and apologize for the slip up. Well, that's exactly what I mean. So, if you're in a store and you are a trans girl and someone calls you sir, you kind of have two possible responses to that, right? A simple, polite, oh, actually, it's ma'am, whatever, or to blow up at them. And if you meet that transphobia with kindness, with, no, actually, it's ma'am, it's all right, then it's fine. Then everyone learns and they can grow from it. If they're actually transphobic, then it may plant a seed that all trans people aren't shit, and maybe their behavior and attitudes will change. But if you just blow up at them, then it reinforces that idea that trans people are these unhinged lunatics that need therapy and are insane, and you're never going to change people's minds that way. I mean, obviously, it's different for every person what level of abuse or what have you they can endure. Abuse being a relative term here, but it's better to assume that they're not trying to deliberately misgender you, because you'll get better outcomes, than to assume everyone is trying to deliberately misgender you. That's what I meant by the charity in the discussion.
Somebody, a trans man who is medically transitioned, you're looking at somebody who physically is...
And again, like the old saying goes, if you go out and about and you meet an asshole, then you met an asshole. But if everyone you meet every day is an asshole, then maybe you're the asshole.
Almost 100% male, especially after surgeries and stuff. I think you just have to make sure that people remember attraction isn't just based on genitals. What are the mental turmoil / issues having gender dysphoria will cause you? Well, at least for me, when I was really dysphoric before transitioning, I was super out of touch with the real world. I would literally just stay in my room on the computer. I would not ever really talk to my family. I had anger issues because I was so uncomfortable with myself, and I internalized it so much that I just had so much anger at the world, and just that I wasn't living authentically, and it was hard for me to enjoy.
Right, exactly. Yeah, Morning Bird. There are some people who do that though, and they're being shitty people when they do that. The assumption again with the GameStop trans girl is that she was called sir once and immediately started blowing up at the employee. Which I always assumed that there was much more to that interaction than was filmed, but, we don't know. As far as I know, there's not been any information surfaced about that, but I could be wrong. So yeah, I agree, Morning Bird.
Life, or to enjoy the company of other people who were happy when I wasn't happy. So a lot of the times people who transition will just become a much happier and more energetic and more social version of themselves, because finally the way other people see them reflects the way that they see themselves. T, more than anything else, transition wise, skyrocketed my confidence and just made me a much more likable person, a much more happy person. Will I regret the choice of transition?
I do wonder how much of that was the testosterone and how much of that was just being more comfortable in your body as it changed and as you socially transitioned. I know hormones can have a huge impact on your body, but to say that testosterone will give you more confidence as a cisgender male is not necessarily my experience. But, I mean, obviously I don't know his personal experience. It's just an observation. Yeah, exactly, Morning Bird. People are people. Interact with people how you would like to be interacted with, and the world will be a better, more harmonious place.
Transitioning and the potential harm of testosterone and surgery. There are tons of TERF agenda websites and anti-trans websites that will claim to be scientific and claim that testosterone has all these negative side effects of raising your blood pressure and doing all these things, but realistically, testosterone is just going to change your biological makeup from that of a cis female to that of a cis male. So, your chances of a heart attack, it's raised, but it's not raised tremendously. It's raised to the cis male level. If you were born a cis male,
And that truscum rhetoric comes out there. Change from a cis male to a cis female. Ugh. it, yeah, the biological differences between men and women, there are definitely some, but they're not as much as many TERFs and truscum like to think.
Chances of heart attack or whatever other conditions they say that you can get from being on T, which I've never met anyone that really had any like major issues because of testosterone. Top surgery is the same way. Top surgery, as long as you go to a reputable surgeon, don't just go to the first surgeon that you find that takes your insurance. Find somebody that, if you can take your insurance, but make sure you go to somebody whose results are good and that they haven't botched people.
I suppose it's worth pointing out that he is talking about this from the perspective of an upper middle class or upper class background. Like, not everyone even has insurance which would cover cosmetic surgery like top surgery or bottom surgery. So that may not even be an option. This is an option I know multiple trans people on social media complain about. Either they don't have surgery or they don't have insurance, or their insurance won't cover it, so they have to find the thousands and thousands of dollars out of pocket.
Who have done like quite a few surgeries, you will 100% thank yourself later. But there's no really negative side effects of top surgery, except for minor complications that are usually pretty fixable. With bottom surgery, that's a whole nother ball game, and I could make a whole video series on bottom surgery and the complications and the controversy around that. But I think that anybody who's getting bottom surgery has to be 18 years old anyways, so it's not really something you're worrying about as a kid. Will you regret the choice of
That is something I tend to agree with. Surgical change should probably be relegated to when you're an adult and have fully gone through whatever puberty you're going to go through. Like, even if you start hormones younger, as far as I understand it, starting hormones before puberty, being on puberty blockers and then transitioning to hormones when you're younger will prevent things like breast growth and the development of an adult penis. So it's not as big a deal. But I do think that it should be something that should wait, if it's not medically or legislatively the rule now, that should be the case. But I'm open to other data which contradicts that. That just seems to be the way to best prevent regret and pain in the future.
transitioning. There are a lot of people who do, and that's why, like, and I'm gonna make another video on this as well, because I have a lot more sources and a lot more logic behind my stance on this. Do not transition, especially medically, if you don't have dysphoria. This is not coming from me
There it is. Why not, Kalvin? Why not?
trying to fuel the trans med agenda. I'm literally just trying to prevent people from making permanent changes to their bodies and permanent changes to their social life, to their family, to things like that you're gonna eventually regret and wish you had never done in the first place. I think.
Why do you think they would regret it, Kalvin? Because again, the overwhelming majority of detransitions are from either misdiagnosis or overwhelming social pressure against the transition, regardless of their internal feelings or, mental state. So, while I understand where your argument is coming from, if you're not dysphoric and want to transition, that is your right. It's as simple as that.
I think it's really, really important to talk to somebody, whether that is a counselor at school, whether that is a psychologist, whether that is even an endocrinologist who has dealt with trans people before. You need to talk to somebody before making the final decision to go on hormones who has some sort of license in counseling, psychology, anything like that is licensed to hear you talk about this. Their job is to understand what's going on in your head and to help you make the right decision. So you really, really need to find someone who's going to affirm you, but also hold your hand through the process and help you decide if this is the right thing for you to do. Why do you need to medically transition? I made a video about this, but it's kind of the same reason why transition in general is necessary, and that's because you would rather have a happy child that transitioned than a child who is constantly depressed, constantly anxious, never wanting to talk to people, not even wanting to socialize, and literally wanting to die. Would you rather have a kid that transitioned or a dead child? That's what I tell parents. I mean, it's like a hard reality, but there's so many trans people out there that if they hadn't had the opportunity to transition, they would have killed themselves. There are trans people that have killed themselves because they didn't have the opportunity or a family that loved them. So your first and foremost job as a parent is to love and care for your.
So, this may be me being uncharitable to Kalvin here, but it feels like he's implying that the dysphoria will cause you to feel like transitioning is the only option, or rather that the dysphoria will make you want to kill yourself, and not like the overwhelming social pressure to conform. So again, this may just be me being uncharitable, but that's kind of the impression I get here, that dysphoria will make your child suicidal. And no, it's just discomfort with their body combined with societal pressure. That's why the suicide attempt rate for trans people is so high.
Your child, and do what you can to keep them healthy, and that isn't just physically, that's mentally as well. How do I support my kid who's questioning their gender? My advice for this would be to ask questions to them, and make sure that they're not too pressing questions, but open-ended questions. You know, like, how are you feeling today? How does it make you feel when I call you this name? How does it make you feel when I call you by this pronoun? Or even a word like buddy, or like son, or things like that. Like, if they're asking you to call them by a different name, ask them how they feel about it, and ask them if there's anything else that you can do to affirm the way they're feeling. And make sure that you always make sure your child knows, whether you decide to transition or not, I support you and care about you, and my number one priority is for you to be happy and to live a good, authentic life. That is...
Oh, it's a musical staff. That's cool. Neat. That's true, Morningbird, yes. But again, it's a combination of issues, not just the dysphoria.
The job of any parent, in my opinion. Why can't you just be a masculine female? I'm assuming that's what someone's parents ask. I think that it's important to remind them that there's a difference between gender and gender expression. There's plenty of girls out there who like to dress like guys. There are plenty of lesbians out there that 100% dress as a guy.
This is why we need to just do fucking away with gender. I think I found the thumbnail. Gender is the cause of so many issues in this world, that if we just eliminated it and just said there's no such thing as gendered clothing or gendered experiences, gendered activities, then I think the world would be a better place. Unfortunately, we're nowhere near that.
But
it can feel helpless and dark just as much as social ostracism. Yeah, I agree, Morningbird.
being trans and having dysphoria is about your body. It is about the way that others in society view you and address you. When you're trans, it should make you feel very, very, very good about yourself when other people refer to you as the pronouns and name that you see yourself with. And it should make you feel very good when your body appears the way that you view it. Let's say that you identify as FTM. It should make you feel really good, obviously, when you look in the mirror and you look very masculine, your body looks very masculine. And so it's not just about the clothes you wear or the way that your hair looks, it's about your body. You know, for me, even if clothes weren't a thing or anything like that, I would have still wanted a male body, like my shoulders getting more broad, my waist being more, you know, like this, having more vascularity, having a very masculine face, having a deep voice. That's a big one. These are all things that make you feel very, very, very good when you transition, because dysphoria is an innate thing. It's a biological thing, and it's not just about your expression. My mom has said, I think you should just learn to accept your body. The number one thing I think you should do for this is, number one, you should definitely always try to be respectful and logical with your parents, because even if they aren't doing that to you, they can use that against you. As you trying to be mad at them or something, just say, you know, Mom, I'm looking at this from a medical standpoint. You know, you could even pull up videos of trans people talking about gender dysphoria. You could bring up videos of therapists discussing gender dysphoria. Show the fucking DSM. I don't know. That's like telling someone that they should just forget about their anxiety and make it go away. They should just forget about their depression and go away. Anxiety and depression are two.
Why are you depressed? You're smiling all the time. Yeah, that's some true advice there. You know, if someone says, just be happy in your body, the problem is my body is making me feel like shit, so how am I supposed to be happy in it? So yeah, that's... Again, there's some good advice in here mixed in with the transmedicalist bullshit.
To mental disorders in the DSM, just like gender dysphoria is in the DSM. So just because it's taboo doesn't mean that it's not a real...
Wasn't it removed? Oh, that's PDF. Let's see. Maybe it is still. No, I think it is going to be removed with the DSM-6. Gender dysphoria. Yeah. Well, DSM-5 move this diagnosis out of sexual disorder into a category of its own. Gender to gender dysphoria. Okay. I'll have to look into that more deeply because I could have sworn it's being removed from the DSM, but maybe I'm mistaken there. Regardless, the DSM-5 is still a valid resource, and if that is how you can convince your parents that your transness is valid, then by all means.
Tangible thing that exists with like thousands of people, so you should definitely, also therapists can help validate your parents or make them feel better because a therapist is licensed a medical professional. And one way you can also talk to a therapist without having to tell your parents explicitly, oh, I'm trans, I want to see a therapist, to say, you know, mom, I've been talking to a friend who is seeing a psychologist about, you know, anxiety and schoolwork and anything like that, and ask if you could find one that maybe has your insurance that you could talk to. And don't frame it as a trans thing, because I think a lot of unaccepting parents would maybe try to find like a non-trans therapist or like a conversion therapist. So you want to be kind of broad about it. If you live in a conservative area, you could maybe try to find a therapist that takes your insurance and then say that your friend went to the person and that you think that it might help you do better in school or something random like that. I don't really know. Most parents don't get that trans kids go through different names. Yeah, that is very true. If I'm being realistic with all of you, I know that when you first come out and picking a name is like the most exciting thing and you want to call yourself fucking Caden or Levi or like Alex or Oliver or Calvin with a K, maybe ask your parents what they would have named you if you were a boy. I think down the line, especially if you are very binary and you kind of just want to transition and live your life as the gender that you identify with and be stealth, you don't want to pick a name that is stereotypically a trans guy name. And I know that a lot of people don't think about that, but that's something that I wish I had thought about, is picking a name, maybe even just Calvin with a C, because I don't know anybody else named Calvin with a K. I wish I just picked a more generic white guy name, you know? And my parents did pick Calvin. I will say that they liked the name, and I gave them a list of like, I wanted to keep the initial K, and I let them pick the name, but that didn't help my parents just picking the name. They picked something they liked, and that can help your parents as well.
Maybe this is just me, but I never really considered Calvin with a K as a trans guy name. Maybe this is something because I've only recently started really paying attention to, like in the last year or so, paying attention to trans spaces and the way trans people behave and interact and what have you. But I guess I encounter enough odd names that are spelled differently, particularly in young people, that I think this is less of an issue now and is going to continue to be less of an issue. But I mean, again, he would know more about picking a trans name than I would as a cis guy. But I know I've never looked at a name and said, that's an unusual name. That person must be trans. They must have picked it themselves. Outside of one or two names where the name is a little too perfect for the person in question, but you know.
But yeah, a lot of trans people do go through different names, and just tell your parents that if you're gonna transition, you want to be 100% sure about everything in your transition, and that can make them understand that you're being more methodical about it, and you're really going through the process and picking something that feels right to you. You say, I want to be 100% correct with myself in this process. I'm taking it slow. I'm not just gonna pick one name that I kind of like, you know. I want to pick something that flows within our family, something like that, you know. Include them in it, like make them feel included, and that will make them more likely to go along with it. Also, I would definitely say that you should do research on trans stuff. I can try to like link some like studies down below, but really I used to have like a whole document of them, but I can ask my therapist for some to put in the links down below in this video. But it's pretty easy to do your own research on gender.
I'm curious what links he linked. His testosterone. Why I need to transition. GC2B. What is GC2? Oh. Okay. Neat. It's funny that he would talk about studies because the studies are going to link to like if you link literature, it's not going to say that dysphoria is the be all determinant of transness.
Dysphoria, and how many trans people out there don't regret transition. There's a higher percentage of trans people who have medically transitioned that don't regret it than who do. I hate to say all this because I think there are some parents that just won't come around. I'm sure it can be hard for people out there watching this who don't have supportive parents and never will to hear me talk about my supportive parents and oh, here's ways you could maybe try, and your parents just don't get any of it. If you're in that situation, just remember that when you turn 18, you gotta do what's best for you. I know that it can be really, really damaging to have your parents telling you that you're not valid, or having your other family members telling you that you're gonna detransition, especially if you fit the mold for the most perfect, you felt this way since you were little, and then your parents are just don't understand at all, Try to talk to friends, try to talk to even friends' parents. I knew this one kid who his parents were super unsupportive, but his best friend's parents were super supportive, and they were able to always make him feel welcome and validated and just feel better at their house, and that can go a long way for even just one person. So if you're a family member of someone who maybe has unsupportive parents, let's say your cousin has an unsupportive family, be the cousin to reach out and say, I support you. I had these unsupportive aunt and uncle, right? And I remember when I first came out, they made a point to misgender me and give me a card with my birth name on it. And my other family members who they knew I was trans, but they didn't really talk to me about it. They made a point to come up to me and say, we support you. Don't let them get to you. We're always here for you. We support you. And that can go a long way. So even if you have to wait to medically transition, there are people in your life who will support you and who will help you feel validated, at least socially, for the time being. How to explain binding to your parents without them getting worried about you hurting yourself.
I feel like I should pop in here and mention that, yeah, if you look hard enough, you can definitely find people who will support you, and you need to find them and hold on to them. But unfortunately, Kalvin's experience is not universal, especially if you live in a conservative area. I don't know where Kalvin lives. If I had to guess, I'd say California or someplace like that. But if you live in Tennessee or South Carolina, you'll probably have a hard time finding people who are going to be supportive of you. That is why online safe spaces are so important. But yes, it is very important to find people to support you. That's more than 90% of parents, regardless of who you are, being disowned by your family is trauma. Yeah, I'm 32, so being disowned by my parents would be... It really depends on why I was being disowned, but I can understand, particularly if you're younger, it can be quite traumatic. So, yeah. Yeah, I know, right, 87. Yeah. If you're young, particularly if you're still dependent on them, being disowned by them can be quite traumatic. I agree.
I don't know about that one, to be honest. Maybe I would just tell them, I would send them GC2B's website. I think GC2B might have a portion of their website that talks about the safety of their binders, but tell them that, as long as you wear one that is your appropriate size, if you've seen me standing up or something, and your body's similar to mine, I was a medium, you can definitely tell your parents that you could even try a size up first and see how that feels. Or really, at the end of the day, I think I saved up a bunch of money on Visa gift cards in order to buy myself my first binder. But over time, I told my mom, and I broke down one day because there was a swim binder that Underworks had. Don't buy it, by the way, it sucks. But I was super, super, super dysphoric, and my family was going on a trip to Florida. I think I told my mom. It was right before I had really talked to my dad. He knew immediately, but we didn't really talk about it. But my dad always called me the right pronouns and name always. He just didn't really talk to me about it at first. But my mom, I just broke down to her about it and explained to her that I was going to be so dysphoric if I didn't somehow bind safely in the water, and that this was the safest option, and that it was made for it. And she bought it for me, and it was $50, and that's a solid amount of money. And so sometimes...
Also, a huge problem is queer community hasn't developed effective outreach strategies, and sometimes it causes unnecessary hostility. That is something else I've heard, right, 87. I have actually heard that some of the most transphobic people you can talk to are gay cis men. So yeah, I definitely believe that, particularly in meat space in real life, queer communities can have trouble. But yeah, I believe that. It's an issue I experienced as, not to say that nerds were oppressed or persecuted to the degree that trans and gay people have. I am not trying to say that. But as nerd culture became more popular and more mainstream, watching as these nerds who had been in it for, since they were younger, as they became more and more hostile to people coming into the culture, I can totally understand how that would be even worse for queer culture. How people who have been struggling with a queer identity for years and years or decades and decades, seeing it become more mainstream, more popular, struggling with more people coming in. That's true. But I'm talking about more like the rise in the popularity of video games and now tabletop games and comic books and that kind of thing, as that became more mainstream and divorced from queer culture. I'm well aware of the, yeah, and I can understand, not agree with, but understand people being suspicious of mainstream newcomers.
The best thing you can do is just make them feel empathy for you. Like if you break down like your
And ultimately, when you start gatekeeping like that, you end up creating a worse environment. So don't gatekeep. If people, like, this goes for queer culture as much as it goes for nerd culture. If people want into your culture, that's only a good thing. At least in my experience. Exactly. Gatekeeping is counterproductive.
parents are going to know this is something that you are very upset about and just say, you know, I don't normally do this, mom, but this is something that makes me very, very, very uncomfortable, and this is something that will help me so much. So yeah, sometimes you can just fucking be a crybaby about it. That's what I do. Why do we need to call you he? You've never been a daughter to us, just our kid. That's really hard. My parents said shit like that at first, where they're like, well, you know, you've always been our kid, and it almost sounds like, at least from just that your parents are trying in a way to make you feel more valid. But just tell them, like, you know, I just would really prefer for you to call me he. I would really prefer for you to call me by this name. I'm not gonna be mad at you if you slip up at first. Even if you can get your parents to not call you by your birth name and not call you by like gender specific terms, like, oh, this is my child, this is my kid, like, or just address you by first letter. You know, for me, like, my birth name before was Kaylee, and I shortened it to Kale when I first came out because I knew that that would be easier for my parents to transition into. And my parents definitely, even though they had a harder time with calling me he at first, they just wouldn't use gender specific terms. They would just really avoid it because they didn't want to make me upset. What's about to come?
This is another big issue that a lot of early transitioners run into, is that since most people don't think about pronouns, they just let their brain kind of shortcut to what does this person appear to be, so that's the pronoun I'm going to use. This is something I do still, that I'm working on. So this is again why we say don't assume that someone is trying to be a dick to you if they misgender you, because sometimes if you are trans but say you're not very far along in your transition, you may still have things that signal to the normal mainstream brain, whatever gender you were assigned at birth, that you just default to those. And it takes a conscious effort to at first to train yourself to either use gender neutral pronouns or to remember what someone's pronouns are. And again, this is where it all goes to intent. If you just slip up and make a mistake, it's not a big deal. If it keeps happening, that's when it becomes a big deal. Right, 87. And what do you mean it's not some common thing, Morningbird? Yeah, these neo pronouns that I see a lot of people use online. Yeah. A lot of those, sometimes I think they use those on social media as a joke, but because I've talked to multiple people who are more heavily involved in queer space, and they haven't met people who use those neo pronouns. It's pretty much just he, him, she, her, they, them. But again, just be respectful, consider what people want. It's that simple.
Oh, so when it comes to medical transition, so parents want to know like the general timeline of medically transitioning. Now this can vary from state to state where you go, things like that. When I transitioned, I came out when I just turned 15. I came out as trans. I first told my family and those who were very close to me, and I transitioned like over the summer between school years. So when I came back to school in the fall, I emailed my counselor and had them send like a mass email to my teacher saying, you know, this student is transgender, he would prefer to go by this name, he would prefer to go by these pronouns, and all my teachers were very supportive about it. The first thing I think that any parent should do is set up a psychologist, therapy, counselor appointment with somebody who is knowledgeable on gender topics, but also is a general psychologist who knows a broad group of psychology topics. And then when that therapist is talking about hormones and stuff, they can talk to you, they can talk to your parents, and depending where you live, you may need a letter to start on hormones. But you generally have a thing called informed consent in a lot of places where you just need your parents to sign off and you to sign off. You don't necessarily need a therapist, though I 1000% recommend it. You make an appointment at like an endocrinologist, or usually an endocrinologist, a trans-friendly endocrinologist. Planned Parenthood does it as well. And they will talk to you about the changes of T, and they will teach you how to do the shot. I would recommend to do subcutaneous shots. They're so much better than intramuscular shots. And the shots are like super easy. The needle for sub-Q is like this big. It just like goes in like the fat on your stomach. And then surgery is a little more complicated. You do probably need psychologist letters for most places. And a lot of times insurance has like hoops to jump through. But I had surgery when I was 17 and I recovered very well from top surgery. I was ready like to walk around, like just like do normal things by the second day. It's just kind of drains that are a nuisance. Recovery can be really easy from top surgery, and those are the two major things that I think a lot of younger trans people go through is top surgery and T. And they're both fairly simple procedures to go through. I mean, top surgery is considered like, oh, surgery, but it's really not that big of a deal, and the healing time for top surgery is very worth it compared to how much better you'll feel. I really do think it's medically necessary for people with FTM gender dysphoria. Isn't a packer and dildo the same thing? I hate that word, like the second one, because a packer isn't that. You know, a lot of times a packer isn't even necessarily for sex. A soft packer can be something that really helps your dysphoria.
Yeah, that is one I've never seen, because I would assume that a packer being something that an FTM trans person would use to appear that they have male genitalia, have a penis. I would assume that it would not be super functional for sex, for the purposes of a dildo, because I know I wouldn't want to walk around with something that is ready for sex all the time. Like, even ignoring the potential discomfort, that seems really awkward to be around in public. So I would not, like, I would assume that it's something much more designed to look like a penis at rest than something that's ready for action, so to speak.
I know it can be very, very awkward to ask your parents for that type of thing. I never asked my parents to buy me a packer ever. Like, full disclosure, I could not have done that. My parents know about them. Like, I talked about them to my parents, like, over time when, like, they were like, oh, why do you have that? And I'm like, oh, well, it's because, you know, it's for my dysphoria. I didn't want to talk about sex at the time. You know, pack and plays are different too, because when you have like a dildo or a strap-on for like a girl-on-girl type of thing, you're only using it for sexual purpose. There's no other purpose than sexual. But like with a trans guy pack and play, or like even like just a fake penis that can be for sexual use, they're very, very realistic. They try to make them as realistic as possible, the ones that are meant for FTMs, because it's very, very validating and helps alleviate dysphoria in a very dysphoria-inducing situation like sex, because trans people want to live normal lives. We want to have sex with people, you know, without feeling dysphoria. For a lot of people, it's just going to make your life much more normal. It's going to make sex a much more positive experience for you. Also, a lot of the times your insurance will cover hormones. Egg retrieval. That is a whole thing that I did not go through. I would recommend reaching out to either Noah Fintz or my cousin Arden. I'll put both of their Instagrams like right here. They are both two people I know who went through the process. For me, I just didn't see the point in it because
Honestly, Rye87, it's something that I had never really thought about, but as soon as he talked about a Packer, he's talked about it in one or two other videos I've watched. You know, it makes sense. I can understand how an FTM would want to have something to fill out that genital area under the clothing, and making it look realistic would also go towards affirming and validating yourself. So, yeah, that is something that I'm glad exists. Not something I care about or would ever care to purchase, but good to know it exists.
Because knowing that my egg could be used for a child and that would therefore make me I'm a very like biologically fueled person. If your egg was like the egg the baby came from, you're the mother of the child biologically. It doesn't matter if you live a father role. Like I would
You're the parent of the child, yes.
live my whole life as a child's father, never even talking about it. But I would know in my mind that I'm like the mother of the child. And I don't like that shit. That would make me dysphoric. That would make me probably resent my kid. So not for me. But definitely talk to your parents about that if you're interested in it. Is it worth?
Yeah, I feel like this, oh, you want to save your eggs is a very bioessentialist, and I'm not sure the exact word you would use, but the kind of thing that someone who basically is more worried about the continuation of their family line than about the health or safety of their children attitude. Like, I don't know, I'm probably never going to have kids. Fortunately, my sister has already had a child, so I know that there's a next generation of my family, but I'm not too worried about that kind of thing. So, you know, this definitely feels like something that kids would that parents who are more worried about having grandchildren than having healthy and happy children would do. So yeah, again, it's up to each individual person, I think. Hey, women use breast implants, so this way is the least invasive. The Packer cosmetic enhancements aren't new. I don't know how that works in detail.
Transitioning if you risk your child becoming a target for bullying and violence? That is a really difficult question. You know, a lot of the time it's really hard for a parent to feel like their child is going to be bullied or something or have prejudice, but at the end of the day, it's still important for your child to live their most authentic life, and it's going to be easier for your kid to deal with bullying. If your kid is transitioned, you know, and living very happily, bullies, I never really got bullied ever, for full disclosure. I was never really bullied in high school. After I transitioned really, like 11th and 12th,
yeah, and this is something that is getting better these days. Younger people are more accepting of transitioning. Again, very dependent on your location. But it's also why it's very important to have a friend group or ideally family who is supportive of you. Because I know that I was bullied not for being transitional, not for being trans or anything, just because I was kind of a weird kid in high school, and also I was fat. I've been fat my whole life. So having a group of friends or family I could go to who I knew wouldn't bully me like that made it a lot easier to get through the day. That, and I had a very superior complex in high school, which made me look on their bullying not like they were putting me down, but just they were idiots trying to live up to my level. So I don't recommend that method either.
grade and became a much more likable person. I was pretty popular at school, to be honest, and I never had any issues with dating friends or bullying or anything like that. Now I live in a very accepting place. I went to a very accepting high school. But I think that it's important to monitor how your kid feels, to monitor the people at school, to encourage your
And yeah, Rye87, this whole thing is anecdotal. That is true. But if everyone went off of data and what the science says, then there wouldn't be the issues he's talking about. So anecdotal information in these particular cases can be useful. And this video is a lot better than I thought it'd be. I mean, the trans medical stuff earlier notwithstanding, he's, like I said, I think there's a decent person in there. It just needs the right influences.
child to speak up if they're being bullied. Encourage your child that it's not a bad thing to go and talk to the counselor or talk to a teacher, because 99% of the time they're going to want to help, and they don't want bullying in the school. You know, they want to have a clean record, especially if your school strives for diversity. They do not want their trans students getting picked on. That is a big thing. This is the last question I'm going to answer, and I'm sorry that I didn't answer more, but someone asked, my parents think gender and sexuality are the same thing. That is something any parent watching this right now, gender and sexuality are very different. As I said, a very masculine girl who likes to date girls is very different than a masculine trans guy who also likes to date girls, even if they're both born female. The difference between a lesbian, a girl who just likes to date girls, is that they just that's just sexuality, that's just sex, you know? That doesn't have to do with your own physical body, the way that you feel when you're alone in your house looking in the mirror. Gender is how you perceive yourself, how others perceive you, how you walk through society, whereas sexuality really only pertains to people you're dating or having sex with. You know, those things, they don't really go hand in hand. It's very ignorant to believe that gender expressions, sex, all these things are the same thing, because anybody who in the past 20 years, 10 years maybe, has gone through farther than general psychology, general sociology, would understand that there are a difference between these things, and that trans people are having a way different living experience than a gay person. If I could have just lived my life as a lesbian, I would have done it. When I was a lesbian before I transitioned,
Yeah, right, 87, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of people who, especially older people, who think that drag or cross-dressing is just something that people do at like strip clubs or other explicitly sexual locations. And so they think that, especially with the drag time story hour that was all the controversy like a year ago on Chud Tube, whatever you want to call it, there's nothing sexual about drag or cross-dressing. In fact, it can be very artistic and beautiful. It often is. Some of the drag queens I have seen look fucking amazing. Just the colors and the ribbons and the bows and all the frillies and whatever they do. They look awesome. There's nothing sexual about it. But because it was relegated, because of society, to that kind of perversion closet for so many years, there's a lot of people who associate it that way. What are you confused about, Morningbird?
I was a girl that liked girls. I was just as unhappy as I was when I identified as straight. You know, I was dating girls and having sex with girls, but I was just as unhappy with myself. Nothing changed in terms of before I decided to come out as gay and date girls and stuff. I still had this very internal struggle.
Believe me, Rye, I was in the Boy Scouts right when they were taken over by the Mormons and started going through the whole anti-homosexual pedophilia thing. So yeah, I am well aware of the not as old as people think assumption that homosexuals are pedophiles by default.
With my body and with the way that people were, it just felt so wrong to be called she and her, and it felt that way my whole life.
In fact, I was just thinking there was a game we liked to play. I think we called it Laffy Taffy, and basically what it was two guys would get down on the floor and wrap their arms and legs around each other as tight as they could. And it was supposed to be a team building exercise because you'd wrap it up and like one or two other guys would get and try to pull them apart. We had to stop doing that because people thought that it was promoting homosexuality. There are definitely people, Morningbird, who use drag in a sexual way. But there's just as many people, if not more people, who don't view it in any sexual way.
Life, you know, a lot of trans people will feel gender dysphoria and feel the implications of misgendering, even if it's not misgendering at the time. They'll feel the dysphoria from that before they even develop sexual feelings. I was telling my mom that I was a boy and that I wanted to be called Kyle and that I wanted to have a penis before I was old enough to even want to date anyone or have sex with anyone. So you just have to keep that in mind, and that you can do your own research. Parents, I always recommend doing research. Make sure you're looking at sources that are unbiased. You don't want to go into it with a closed mind because you're going to end up gravitating towards sites that have a right-leaning bias. And anybody who's doing research,
I assume Rye is referring to deviation as a deviation from the societal norm as opposed to like sexual deviancy or anything like that. Yeah, exactly.
on anything should be fact checking and looking into the bias of any source that you're looking at. You know, it's okay to look to something that leans a little one way or the other, but you don't want to be on an alt-right website looking at trans people. You're just going to get a completely skewered view of it, and you also don't want to be on an alt-left trans website telling you that every single gender in the book is valid. You don't want to do all that. You want to go ahead and do research in an unbiased
alt-left, as in the sociology and psychology and biology studies which support non-dysphoric transition, but whatever.
Scientific way that will really shed light on what trans people go through, can explain to you the medical and scientific reasoning and study behind transgender people and what we go through on a daily basis. So thank you guys for watching. I'm sorry.
Alright, that was better than I thought it would be, to be perfectly honest. Like I said, I really do think there is some very good stuff in Kalvin Garrah, and if somehow someone can get through to him and get him to go against his financial interests to change his attitudes, especially now that he's no longer dependent on his parents for, you know, food and medical care and what have you. I assume he's probably still on his parents' insurance, since being a YouTuber doesn't provide much in the way of insurance, but pretty sure a 385k subscriber probably has a good financial cushion. But yeah, this was better than I thought it would be. He had some good advice here mixed in with some truscum rhetoric, but yeah, could be worse. Hey, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show. Remember to like, share, and leave a comment because it helps me. Subscribe and ring that bell to help you. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.